police do need to work harder at ensuring there is an open relationship and communication between the parties.
Tonight, police respond to the multiple testimonies about shoddy investigations into missing and murdered Indigenous women.
The Métis National Council questions who is Métis. This time it's directed to the Metis Nation of Ontario.
The estates might also be able to benefit from these sales.
And with record-breaking auctions, is the Inuit art contribution to the economy being undercut? Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. The inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is on its third day in Calgary. They are hearing oral submissions from parties with standing.
So far, interactions with police services has been highlighted as one of the most critical topics. Tamara Pimentel reports.
I've heard multiple examples of how police are perceived to have failed, and in many cases continue to fail, Indigenous people in this country.
Interactions with police services has been one of the most critical topics of the oral closing submission hearings. Katrina Swan is a representative of the Saskatchewan Association of Chiefs of Police, which is made up of 12 municipal police services in the province. Swan is the first of only a few parties with standing to represent police services in this week's hearings. She says the SACP has been taking note of the issues arising within the inquiry.
Contact with the family is a critical part of the investigative process. I would love to stand before you today and say we get it right all of the time. But as you've heard, as often as we get it right or think we get it right, we're being told that we missed the mark. The police do need to work harder at ensuring there is an open relationship and communication between the parties.
Charlene Bellew of the Eskedem First Nation in British Columbia represents the First Nations Health Council. She shared stories of missing and murdered women from her community and how cultural protocols are used as an alternative to the RCMP or criminal justice branch.
The victims of violence feel that they lose their voice in the criminal justice system. We wanted to be able to give them a voice through these protocols. Through these protocols, the offenders acknowledge their behaviours, so where there may have been criminal investigations and they totally deny that anything happened, when we have our healing circles, they do acknowledge the behaviour and they do acknowledge having perpetrated those crimes.
And while there are things police services need to work on, Swan says in Saskatchewan the SACP have been improving.
Police are involved in a number of initiatives designed to address the root causes of vulnerability and marginalization of Indigenous women and girls. Police services in Saskatchewan are becoming more and more involved in restorative justice efforts and are working collaboratively with community partners to ensure better linkages for individuals to wraparound care and support services.
We feel a responsibility that we can help these families, that we don't have to wait for the RCMP or police services or search and rescue, that we can do things on our own and we should be doing what we can for these families.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Eric Dieger was a serial pedophile when he was a priest in the Nunavut town of Igloolik. In 2015, he was convicted of 24 counts of sex crimes against Inuit youth between 1978 and 1982. Two of his last appeals have been rejected by a Nunavut Court of Appeal. Dieger was appealing the convictions and his 19-year sentence in front of a three-judge panel in Iqaluit. The judges upheld the original 200-page-long court decision, finding it clear, comprehensible, and sufficient. The court added that Dieger's flight from justice after he fled Canada after being charged and stayed away for 17 years meant they could not reduce his sentence.
If you live on Baffin Island, you're actually closer to Greenland than you are to the rest of Canada, and Greenland just reached out with a donation for their neighbours in Nunavut. The government of Greenland responded to the fire at Iqaluit's north part with a donation to the government of Nunavut of around 150,000 Canadian dollars. According to Greenland's finance minister, they were just being good neighbours.
We are a neighbouring country, and the Inuit in Nunavut are our next of kin. So it's a very natural gesture for us.
The Nunavut government hasn't yet said how they will spread that Greenland goodwill.
We're always wanting to hear what you have to say. Here's how you can continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. Also, you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous headlines.
A 36-year-old Six Nations woman has been charged with accessory after the fact in connection with the murders of 3 people from her community, including one victim who was 7 months pregnant. Our colleagues at CTV have more.
3 families in Six Nations forever changed after a triple homicide.
I pray for those children, the family. It's very, very upsetting.
Stephanie Steyer says the community hasn't been the same since the murders.
They've taken 3 community members plus a baby, a young boy, and I think that's devastating to our community.
33-year-olds Alan Porter, 32-year-old Michael Jameson, and 37-year-old Melissa Miller found dead in a stolen pickup truck earlier this month near Oneida Nation of the Thames. Miller, 7 months pregnant.
It makes everybody uptight, definitely. Yes, it's very sad.
Shortly after the murders, the victims' families held a news conference pleading to the public for answers. Weeks later, the first arrest, a woman charged in connection to the case. Police say 36-year-old Kirsten Bomberry of Six Nations was arrested on Friday and charged with 3 counts of accessory after the fact to murder. OPP say the investigation continues. Anyone with information is being asked to come forward.
I just think that justice needs to be served, whether it's on reserve or off reserve.
As part of the investigation, there will be periodic road closures along 4th Line in Six Nations. Heather Centerin, CTV News, Six Nations.
The Métis National Council has cracked down on one of its own governments today in a big way. The MNC has recommended the suspension of the Metis Nation of Ontario based on their acceptance of non-Métis citizens and communities.
The MNO has consistently...
The Métis Nation of Ontario has... The Métis Nation of Ontario has accepted 6 new historic Métis communities. However, President Clem Chartier says just one is actually connected to the Métis Nation. The MNO has also grandfathered in numerous people who are not Métis after being asked several times by the Métis National Council to stop and fix this. They didn't comply. So today, the Métis National Council tabled a recommendation of suspending the Métis Nation of Ontario, something that does not sit well with the Métis Nation of Ontario President Margaret Froh.
Not surprisingly, I have a lot to say with regard to this report. And I want to start by saying that the Métis Nation of Ontario believes in the integrity of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We are not working to undermine the homeland or the Métis Nation, and that is a fact. We are a Métis government working to advance the Section 35 rights of Métis peoples living in Ontario.
Meanwhile, the government of Manitoba has cancelled 2 agreements with the Manitoba Métis Federation. One was worth $20 million and the other was worth $67 million. It's known as the Turning the Page Agreement. The MMF and the province were in court this morning. The Federation was hoping the Manitoba Court of Queen's Bench would grant an injunction to maintain the Turning of the Page Agreement that was originally signed in 2014. But the judge denied the MMF request for the injunction to halt the government from terminating the deal. President of the Manitoba Métis Federation says this is not the end.
He also made it very clear that these are Métis Nation or Section 35 rights holders, which Premier Palliser calls a special interest group. So basically meaning that we don't have rights. So that without doubt in the province didn't say a word there because they were debating now with the Chief Justice of Manitoba.
We need to take a short break.
But first, here's a look at an upcoming special edition of Nation to Nation.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and Nation to Nation will be coming to you from the traditional territory of the Tk'emlúps people. It's one of the communities leading a lawsuit for day scholars.
The day scholars were the ones that were left out of the residential school settlement. At the 13th hour, the Harper government said either drop day scholars or we don't have a settlement.
That's on Nation and Nation this Thursday at 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern.
Starting on the East Coast, +4 with snow for Halifax and St. John's. -1 under the sun in Nain, +1 with snow in Cartwright. 2 above for Montreal, 1 above for Quebec City and Saguenay. +3 with snow for Toronto, 2 above in Ottawa under sunny skies. -2 in Wawa, Timmins and Kapuskasing. In northern Manitoba, -10 for Puckatawagan, -9 in snow in Churchill. -3 with snow for Winnipeg and Gimli, -5 in Dauphin and Brandon. +3 for Swift Current, -2 for Regina and Saskatoon, -3 in Meadow Lake and Buffalo Narrows.
Welcome back. Members of Big Stone Cree Nation are heading back to the polls. An arbitrator has ruled a new election will take place December 18th. As we told you yesterday, it follows a number of appeals that were filed over irregularities with the October 29th vote. An arbitrator heard from 3 members who filed appeals, including a member who ran for and lost a council seat. Elections in Big Stone are often controversial. New elections were also ordered in 2010 and in 2014. It's not the only controversy there, though. Chief and council recently voted to give themselves a $60,000 raise from a band-owned company.
Senator Lillian Dick will soon release a report that will likely make people in Canada's justice system uncomfortable. In a study that she shared with APTN News, Dick's research claims that there is a discrepancy in the way men are sentenced when facing convictions of violence against Indigenous women. Senator Dick joins us from Parliament Hill. Senator Dick, thanks for taking some time for us here. What is the discrepancy that you found in terms of how men are sentenced if they face a crime of violence against an Indigenous woman compared to a non-Indigenous woman?
Basically, what our new report has shown is that if it's a female victim who's Indigenous, the sentence is lighter. But if it's a non-Indigenous victim, the sentence is a bit longer. So in cases like murder and homicide and manslaughter, basically you're looking at the sentence for years of parole. So if it's an Indigenous female victim, then it takes fewer years of parole before you're eligible, fewer years before you're eligible for parole than if you were a non-Indigenous victim. So her case is not taken as seriously and the sentence is lighter.
Senator, your research also looked into who was committing these crimes. What can you tell us about that?
Who committed? What we did was we looked at whether or not the perpetrator was Indigenous or not. Mm-hmm. And if it was an Indigenous perpetrator, what really surprised us was that especially if he murdered an Indigenous woman, then he got a light sentence. But if he murdered a non-Indigenous woman, then the sentence in terms of years for parole was much, much, much longer. So the value placed on the non-Indigenous female victim was much greater than it was for the Indigenous victim. We also found that we were looking to see whether Indigenous and non-Indigenous men were murdering female Indigenous women, and we found that about a third of the men who murder Indigenous women are not Indigenous. And most of those were really not known to them. We also looked at that. So it isn't just Indigenous men, and it isn't just domestic violence and intimate partner violence. For Indigenous women victims, it's also being targeted by people they don't really know, and in most cases those are people who are not Indigenous.
Senator, you have a bill going through the House of Commons at the moment that you say will help address this issue. Can you tell us how it will do that?
The bill that's in the House of Commons right now is Bill S-215, and what I've proposed in that bill is to make it an aggravating factor if the female victim is Indigenous and if the crime is assault, including sexual assault or murder, because those are the offenses that we all know now that Indigenous females are more vulnerable to. After the report from the RCMP and now that the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women is ongoing, Canada is beginning to recognize that Indigenous women are much more likely to be victims of violence. So this will then instruct the courts to take her case more seriously because our data shows that right now they're not.
Senator, very important research. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about it here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Inuit art is big business, but the record-setting price for a recent print has some thinking bigger.
That story and more coming up, but first here's a look at the rest of Thursday's weather forecast. Picking back up in northern Alberta, -4 and snow for Fort McMurray, -6 in High Level, +6 for Medicine Hat, sunny skies, and 9 above in Lethbridge. +9 as well for Tofino and Victoria with showers expected, 9 under the sun in Vancouver. -3 in Dease Lake, +4 for Smithers and Prince George. -6 in Dawson and Mayo, -2 and snow for Whitehorse. -7 in Fort Liard and Trout Lake, 14 below for Yellowknife and Norman Wells. -18 in snow in Sax Harbor, 13 below for Colville Lake. -20 in Baker Lake, 10 below for Cambridge Bay and Whale Cove. -13 in Igloolik, -23 in Resolute. Welcome back. Nunavut has the highest percentage of artists in Canada, and when you look at all 4 Canadian Inuit regions, art contributes over $87 million annually to the Inuit economy. And a record-setting auction has some Inuit wondering if it should be more.
This is Enchanted Owl by Kanujwa Ashiva, originally printed in 1960 and put on a postage stamp in 1970. You've probably seen it before. It's the most famous single piece of Inuit art. Only 50 were ever made, and only 25 of those have that bright orange-red color. One just sold for $216,000 in auction, a record for a Canadian print. In 1960, you could have bought one for $24. That's a great return on investment for the collector, not for the artist. Ashivak's heirs receive nothing from the resale. Nunavut's Artist Lobby Group hopes that changes.
So we support Carfax bid to have the resale rights given back to the artists.
Carfax represents Canadian artists and have called for a 5% royalty on resold art. In the case of the Enchanted Owl auction, that would have meant $10,800 going to Ashivak's heirs. The average artist in Nunavut makes just over $20,000 a year.
Unfortunately, Inuit die at a younger age than non-Inuit do. So the Inuit artists who are moving on and whose families might also be able to, the estates might also be able to benefit from these sales. And I think that's really important that we know that we have prolific artists that are very impactful and that are very important to providing for their families. And if they pass away at a young age, then there's nobody to provide for the children.
One thing to remember, Enchanted Owl was the beginning of a movement in Inuit art. Another, Inuit art consistently increases in value. Ashivak made many more prints. The interest and quality of Inuit art is high, and these resale values will likely continue to rise. The question for Nunavut artists, is it possible for them to enjoy some of the profit the investors, speculators, and collectors have? Ken Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Earlier today, I spoke with several Indigenous athletes about what it takes to be the best and how sport has affected their lives. including powwow dancers and how they keep in shape dance to dance, and how dance can help not only obtain some fitness goals, but connect with their spirit as well.
In the sport of kayaking, it's an Indigenous sport. Kelly Fraser recently told me that kayak is actually pronounced kayak, because it's an Inuit word.
Yeah.
That's something that no one talks about. Like, we don't go to national championships and people are like, hey, this is like, these kayaks came from Inuit people, and they're a modern version, but no one really connects to that. And there's very few Indigenous people for it being, an Indigenous sport.
Right.
And that's concerning to me. And I was very fortunate that I had a lot of support growing up, and I had a lot of I was able to participate in sport, and not everyone has that opportunity. So I really want to post-kayaking career, when I'm home full-time, is to kickstart some programs that are going to make a difference for a lot of Indigenous youth, and we can start using the river and these boats in a way that's bringing us back to tradition and spirit, and solidifying a lot of identity and all those sorts of things.
What I did was I actually did a combination of both spiritual learning as well as the physical fitness portion of combining all of these practices together, because for the Indigenous culture, fitness isn't just about that physical part of things. I mean, all human beings are born with 4 original entities to survive this world, and to try to look at the physical self as something that is completely separate from the emotion, the spirit, and the knowledge part of a spiritual being having human experiences, that physical portion is in combination. So I think that, being physically fit is something that really kind of entrusts into our culture as well, and that are extremely interconnected. So being able to...
So tell us about your training regime to stay in shape for powwow season.
On my lunch hours, I run about maybe 3 kilometers a day, so about 45 minutes just to keep up the stamina. You don't want to be like dancing and all of a sudden you're red-faced and almost passing out while you're waiting, right? So,
have you, for myself, being involved in the dance community as well, I mean, there was a certain point where, attending different ceremonies, different dancing ceremonies, traveling throughout the world and dedicating 20 years worth of my life.
It was a good show. Canada Post workers are back on the job for their first full day of work today, although not everyone is happy about it.
It's a slap in the face, and Mr. Trudeau's lost a bunch of votes.
Many employees are returning disappointed and defeated after 5 weeks of rotating strikes across the country. Canada Post says it won't be business as usual. Unprecedented backlogs will mean lengthy delays ahead of the busy holiday season. Existing pile-ups are expected to become worse this week due to a high number of sales from Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Canada Post is asking customers for their continued patience and understanding. And I, for one, am looking forward to catching up on my junk mail and flyers tonight.
I guess this means I have to do Christmas cards after I said I wasn't going to be because of the strike.
That's all the time we have for you tonight. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.
I'm Melissa Ridgen. We'll see you back here tomorrow.